Geopolitics and Empire is joined by James Poulos, who is co-founder of the American Mind at the Claremont Institute. His upcoming book is Human Forever, The Digital Politics of Spiritual War. We'll be getting his take on the digital apocalypse. Thanks for joining the podcast, James. How is life on the edge of LA, or dare I say, the edge of the world and all of Western civilization?
Yeah, that just about sums it up. It's great to be with you. Nice fall day here by the foothills. Crisp, clear air. None of those fires or riots or lockdowns that we had this time last year. So progress.
Yeah, and it's a nice fall day here in Mexico as well. Although it seems like summer all year. I basically live in summer, which is nice. So there's a lot going on. I've got a list here, and you can take us where you want. Cultural decay that we're seeing made manifest, and everything from wokeism and cancel culture to the perversion of our youth. We have economic collapse. It feels as if the hyperinflation engine is revving. Some say we're living in a post-democracy world, as politicians in countries everywhere are passing mandates that violate their own constitutions in an attempt to create one-party states. Of course, this is technocracy trying to replace democracy, the digital apocalypse, as you call it, which includes the wonderful social credit system with its deplatforming and unpersoning of individuals and now even businesses in both the digital and physical space. Essentially, Skynet becoming self-aware. And last but not least, the rumblings of war, as always, with China, Iran, Turkey, Israel, Russia, Ukraine, you name it. These are truly exciting times. But what's most pressing on your mind? Where should we start?
Well, maybe we can start with the war, since that's kind of a discrete topic unto itself. I mean, I don't think there's any question that we are in the midst of a digital war right now, a war of intelligence, a war of databases against databases. And a war which is, of course, undeclared, which ordinary citizens do not get to know about, and so are unable to deliberate on and unable to practice politics with regard to, which makes it, in that sense, even more dangerous than a normal war, which, at least in theory, is conducted more or less in the open hostilities, as the phrase goes. The problem is complicated by the fact that every state that is large enough to contain within it an organic or original civilization is faced with the same problem in the digital age, which is the problem of how to establish human control within a regime over the bots, over our digital entities, some of which are visible, material, concrete things, and many of which are not visible. They are incorporeal. They fly through the air with the greatest of ease. They do things that until very recently only angels or demons were considered able to do. So China, Russia, the US, India, certain European countries to a degree, thinking of themselves in more explicitly European terms, India, Israel, these civilization states, to borrow a phrase, are all racing to figure out not just how the people in charge at the moment can remain in charge as we cross over into the digital age, but how the foundations of order in those civilization states can be set up again, put on their feet in a way that is going to be able to sustain through the digital age. So we're really talking about every major country in the world that has the resources and the ability to do so, and the sovereignty to do so, simultaneously rushing to refound their regimes on a footing that is compatible with and congruent with digital technology. That is signals a period of tremendous instability, and I think that is behind. That's what's going on behind the scenes of those currently nominally in charge in the U.S., making really a quite naked show of racing to consolidate and centralize their control over every element of life, down to the intimate details. China, of course, has their social credit system up and running. The U.S. has a social credit system already in place right now. You can see it in the press. You can see it by sticking your head out the window. It's not some dystopian future that's around the bend. It's something that is already currently being put in place. And so Americans find themselves waging international wars in a way that is largely invisible to them, and which they seem to have no political influence over, while at the same time waging or participating in a kind of digital civil war. There's a lot of talk right now about sort of red states versus blue states and where that all leads. I think we need to keep in mind that the divorce, the split within the country has already taken place on the internet. And in a digital age, what happens in the computer is more important than what happens outside the computer. And that's got to be our point of departure. I don't think that we're headed necessarily for a real civil war, an old-fashioned civil war. Part of the whole craziness and uncanny quality of the digital age is that it erases or deletes things from real life and moves them into online life. And to a degree, that's happening with war as well.
You tweeted recently, quote, "The civil war is already here, as you just said. It's being waged over whether in the digital age everyone will be forcibly ingested into the dehumanizing cyborg social credit system, which is, as you say, also already here. We didn't ask for this war, but the war came. Want to stay human, you must fight," end quote. And I recently came across a great quote where someone said, "World War III will be everybody against their own governments." So, what do we call this broad war, and is it the social credit system, or that's just a manifestation, one aspect of this? Do we call it technocracy? Great reset. We have all these terms. What's the big thing we're fighting against?
Well, so, look, things like the tweet that you read back. I mean, of course, I stand by this stuff. I spend every day thinking about it. But of course, it's Twitter, so it's very compressed. And people who are coming to it fresh can go like, "Oh my God, what are you talking about? This sounds like you're painting a nightmare scenario." And what I want to underscore is that this is not a dystopian fiction. This is an account of what is already happening. And if it strikes you as something that's horrible, then you should think about the fact that it's already happening. And the reason why it's already happening is because circumstances have pushed our regime in this direction. And we need to understand why it is that has happened. And if we don't get that right, then we're going to be fumbling, for the wrong weapons to fight the wrong battles. So, the most flattering and generous gloss that you can put on the regime in the U.S. right now is, there's been basically one and a half generations in America who have been in charge for many decades. They have consolidated their power. They have consolidated, the economy. They've consolidated the financial system. They've consolidated entertainment. And around the turn of the millennium, they convinced themselves pretty easily that digital devices, digital entities would consummate their global rule, their benevolent control of the globe. I mean, that's what globalization is. That was, this isn't like some nefarious scheme from the standpoint of someone who's like, the US won the Cold War, communism is dead, we need a new world order, and how are we going to structure it in a way that doesn't involve another cycle of kinetic global military conflict? We'll create these, international institutions, and all of our foundations will spin up these NGOs, and we'll have all these public-private partnerships and get corporations to, recognize that if they do what the state wants, then the state will basically just print magic money and give it to them. And in that climate, it made perfect sense on paper that, our military industrial complex and our intelligence community are basically responsible for all the basic research, all the R&D in technology that's going on. They farm it out to, or spin off private companies. Israel does this too. It's just kind of the natural thing that a powerful regime full of highly educated people willing to work hard and put their work and their intellect ahead of other considerations, like, ultimately the good of the people or like their family life. This is a choice that a lot of these people made. I think it was ultimately made for reasons of religious belief. What do you worship? Who do you worship? What is your concept of theological matters? And so the American regime wound up in the hands of these folks who were certain that the automated entities, visible and invisible, that they created would perfect their form of rule over the world, and we would all, in some sense, live happily ever after. Of course, that is not what happened. And rather than taking responsibility for the fact that they fundamentally misunderstood the nature of knowledge and the wisdom of creating machines in order to offload their responsibilities onto mathematics, formalized mathematics, instead of taking responsibility for that, what they did instead is they blamed Americans who voted for Donald Trump, basically. These people are too human. They have all the flaws that human beings have, like they're ugly, they're unhealthy, they're stupid, they're, filled with hate, they are easily misled, just sort of like every possible smear against, the case against humanity was made very forcefully by these people. And I think many of them were already primed to believe this because, if you don't really believe in God, if you're not sort of working off of a biblical political playbook, then you are going to have a fairly unflattering view of human beings and their capacities. And it's true that over the course of the past 20 years, religious adherence in America has sunk as well. And so, yes, the decadence and disaffection among the people form a vicious cycle. And yet the upshot for the ruling factions in America was it's not the technology that's the problem; it's the people who are the problem. And it's certainly not us. It's not. We made these things, and this is all the more proof that we need to be in charge of them and not let the people get their dirty hands on them, where they can, say the wrong things, think the wrong things, have the wrong opinions. And basically just become insubordinate. I like the deplorables was the phrase that was kicked around a lot, but like, what's so deplorable about the deplorables? And ultimately it's that they're insubordinate, and the thinking is that they're insubordinate because they are, they're just a lower grade of humanity, and one that is the human default. And so, the technology needed to create, to sort of terraform people out of their deplorable state into something better, seems to be very inefficient. Perhaps there isn't enough time. And the ruling factions also recognized that, their efforts to cement a sort of new form of global rule through finance and economics didn't work. In 2008, it was a disaster. And that was a humiliation for them. And it put them on notice that what was supposed to be kind of the capstone configuration of their form of rule was fundamentally wrong. It was a mistake. It was a misapprehension of how to do it. And so they looked away from Wall Street. They looked away from the Fed. As much as they needed to flood the system with money, it was basically a realization that the economic and financial system needed to become, it's sort of like we have to destroy it in order to save it kind of thing. And they looked to Silicon Valley. And when the upshot of Silicon Valley, the first really digital age election was one that spit out Donald Trump, they thought, well, we created you. You are the creature of military and intelligence research. And you're the way in which you turned technological weapons into tools and toys, entertainment, and forms of communication has betrayed us. And so you either fix this or there will be hell to pay. And we see what's going on with Facebook now, and we see how quickly and frictionlessly Google, Amazon, others are moving to get in line, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is the people in charge totally biffed it, they blew it, and they will not take responsibility, and they will not relinquish power, and so we have a great reset on our hands instead.
Yeah, back in February 2020, I interviewed Robert Epstein, who testified before Congress, who said, that Google, big tech, Silicon Valley is manipulating the election, but by millions of votes, and he implies that it's possible. His wife died in December of 2020, and he implies that it's possible Google, Silicon Valley took her out, and he called as well. He said that the 2020 was a big tech turning point, and that effectively we're living in an unseen dictatorship, and they were going to flip the election, which I would say they did. I wanted to go back what you mentioned earlier about all these different countries, and this was one of my questions towards the end. You tweeted that, quote, globalism demands China be integrated into a world whole on Western terms, a paradox which induces insanity, end quote. This has been a burning question of mine as well as some of my guests. How close are Western Great Reset elites to the Chinese regime? Is China simply a Kissinger, Soros, BlackRock, British imperial outpost, or American franchise, or are they the captains of their own ship? And the same goes for Russia as well. It's crazy because this week it was reported in the Russian region, they are rolling out clean zones where only those vaccinated with QR codes may enter. And Putin this week said he's cordoning off 23 sections of Russia in the name of global warming. So, what are the global geopolitics of the Great Reset and social credit system?
Yeah, this is complicated stuff in the details, and it's easy to fall back on patterns of thinking that were established when TV was the most powerful medium of communication, and it is not anymore. And so, there's a lot of hay that can be made, just kind of speculating about various what ifs, and I try to do my level best to focus on what is rather than what if. But all that said. Again, it's the reason why we have ruling factions in this country and elsewhere working so hard in the way that they are to establish sovereign social credit systems is not fundamentally because they are stupid or evil or lizard people or fill in the blank with whatever term of abuse. Deplorable, I mean, obviously there are nasty people with bad intentions in positions of power anywhere at any time. This is just a given in human life, and so we should bear that in mind. But we also need to recognize that this situation that we are in is a consequence of the independent formative effects that our technologies have on our inner and outer lives, on how we act, how we think, how we feel, our sensibilities, maybe even our souls. And amidst that transformation, this is simplifying a bit, but I think it's a helpful simplification. There are basically three responses. One response is to say, as the West does, that the individual is sacred, and that the source of chaos is an excess of order. So you look at the pattern of warfare in the West, and it's religious. Religious war is the way of the West. And the story of the West is the story of power concentrating to a certain point that triggers a more or less chaotic collapse. In China, there's a much different attitude. And I think this is more broadly applicable to the East, but China dominates the East for sure, and Chinese ways of thinking in this regard are still very influential in places that hadn't been turned basically over the years into U.S. colonies of a sort, like Japan or South Korea. And that view is the opposite of the Western view. The individual is not sacred. And rather than chaos arising from order arises from chaos. So you have the kind of primal chaos cosmological mythos of the East, and the goal of human life is to understand the way that leads from chaos to order, to balanced, harmonious order in the cosmos and on Earth, securing the mandate of heaven. That leads to a much different understanding of digital technology than the one in the West, and it leads to a much different to-do list in terms of statecraft and geopolitics. Many people in general, and probably many listeners to this podcast, are well aware of the steps that China is taking, not just to get social credit hardwired in, but a specific kind, one that encourages masculine virtue, one that punishes males who behave in Western ways. And what that means, to China, I think, is they look at the West and they see Squid Game, they see dangerous delusions, chaotic fantasies, destabilizing visions and dreams, and what they see coming out of the West is an obsession with hallucination, with the disembodied spirit, and ultimately a worship of light, if I can put it that way, an imbalanced worship of light, and an inability to understand how light and dark must be in balance, and how one cannot be in harmony without the other. And so what you see China doing, and I think this is reflected in, again, it's complicated, but the rise, sort of a return of a Taoist sensibility to the way that top Chinese intellectuals in and out of government are starting to work through this problem. Xi Jinping thought is not Taoism. There are some differences there. There are some tensions, but the Chinese have basically thrown out their Soviet era translations of Marx and have done their own direct translations. And they believe that it is only really through the Chinese civilization state that the lasting ordered harmony between human nature and cosmic nature can be achieved. And that is coloring their approach to digital technology in a way that I do not think is fully or well enough understood in the US. The US or Anglophone approach, look around you and you can see that it's not working very well. The Anglosphere was doing great before digital technology became preeminent. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll was a very, very Anglophone thing. You don't have to just read my book, to reflect on how it is that LSD became so powerful and dominant in the counterculture, or how quickly and thoroughly the counterculture was absorbed back into the establishment culture and used to kind of create a new path, a post-biblical culture, one with tremendous power, and one that understood that nuclear weapons were insufficient to winning the sort of the war against communism for the control of the global left. They needed something more powerful, something that was consistent with their post-biblical faith, and that was digital communications. This is something that can be used as a weapon without having to fire a shot. You can do completely sort of psychological and soul level conflict every minute of every day using machines that are automated on all the time, 24/7. It has been very effective, and then it kind of hit an impasse. You had Snowden. You had China and North Korea and Iran and Russia all ramping up digital operations much more powerful than what America was anticipating. Look at Israel. Obviously lots of smart people in Israel, but small population, really punching above their weight. If you just take a cursory look at what they've been able to do digitally with flipping military and intelligence technology into profitable corporations, they figured it out. And when you look at the track record of Five Eyes, you get a headache. I mean, yes, there are patriots in in the intelligence agencies. Yes, many of them actually care about their country and want to see it thrive, and some of them even want to see the people of the United States happy and healthy and flourishing. But it is insufficient to blame the terrible track record of Five Eyes in terms of intelligence prediction and reaction on the capabilities of our adversaries and enemies to do nasty stuff on the internet. There is a soul sickness at the top of the regime in the US and in the UK. I mean, look at Australia. Like, these things betoken a profound sickness of soul and alienation from the soul. And, these things are not often discussed because they seem to be a little bit gauzier and harder to pin down than, some of the more edgy claims out there about the various cabals and who's really controlling everything, and it's inevitable that people are going to be thinking these thoughts because so much of the command and control structure of the regime that they live in is hidden. It is behind the curtain. But rather than going down those particular rabbit holes, what is needed most of all right now is to recognize that the race is on to reestablish control over the machines, and that the people in charge in the West have become convinced that the only way to do that is to embrace basically a cyborg future, one in which our humanity is at best just a piece of the puzzle, and ideally for them is one where the doors to transhumanism are open, where technology it's kind of takes the place of the soul in the human being, and going beyond just sort of augmenting or supplementing our capabilities, we go to supplanting or replacing our human capabilities and our human identity. This is the terminal point of what China sees as so terrible about the West, is this kind of Gnostic obsession with immortality, with purity, with liberating the universal power of consciousness from the imperfections of the body and the inerrancy of the soul. So that's what's at stake, and the best way that we can face up to this and do something about it is by just taking the immediate, obvious, practical steps that we can take to return to ordinary people the ability to use the most powerful technologies that we have. And I would say that right now, the best way to do that, the best way to get databases into the hands of ordinary people that they can use to create valuable and memorable things, and share them and partake in them together through digital technology is ultimately Bitcoin.
Yeah, and just to comment on, I think you put it very well. The people at the top of the regimes around the world are sick. We had Australia announcing, the health chief there, I forget her name, saying we're going to have to wear masks for years, forever, basically. And people now can't leave their states. In Australia, I saw yesterday they have this basically an internal Soviet passport system now, where you can't go between states in Australia. Even myself now, as a U.S. citizen here in Mexico, I can still cross, not being injected, but my wife is not a U.S. citizen. So this means they just put these rules this week that said by land and by air, foreigners cannot enter without the injection. So that means I can't go with my family now back to the U.S., which, I mean, the people putting these systems into place it's crazy. And you're a very optimistic person, which is what I like about you, your writings. And I wanted to just get your thought real quick before we talk about Bitcoin and some of the solutions, decentralization, on cancel culture, on social credit system. I've talked to Michael Rechtenwald from the center-right conservative libertarianish side. I've talked to Dan Kovalik from the center-left progressive liberalish side. So there's some on the left who are starting to freak out as well. A few, though, I think a lot from the left are promoting this system, and they're all right with it. The only big tech platform I see you using is Twitter. But let's say, James, your Twitter account gets nuked. Let's say the same happens for American Mind and Claremont Institute. I don't know if you use Gmail, but let's say your Gmail account and associated account is YouTube account is disabled. That happened to Jordan Peterson a few years ago. What would you do? How do you react? How bad will this get? Because I'm reading reports of people's bank accounts being closed in the U.S., being put on a no-fly list, being blocked from even like Uber and Airbnb and that sort of thing. So, how bad can this get? And how would you react?
Well, there's no upper bound to how bad it can get. And as sad and alarming as that is, freaking out is not going to solve the problem. It's not even going to ameliorate the problem. This is why we need a Second Amendment for compute, basically. It is not possible at this stage in our technological development to preserve our humanity if ordinary people cannot participate in and control the basic elements of the foundational technology in our lives. And so when, these guys are coming out of the woodwork, like someone like Mo Gaudat, who's like one of these ex-Googlers, who has a book out and he's freaking out. I'm so scared. We're creating God with these machines, we suck. These machines are so much better than we are. To be honest, this person to me has no standing to propose any kinds of solutions to a problem that he was too, ignorant, delusional, well-paid, disenchanted, whatever it is. He and many like him did not see this coming. They did not understand what they were doing. They do not have any kind of serious education into the meaning and the existence of the soul, what it is to be alive, what it is to be human, how formal cause works. They don't know their Aristotle. They don't understand how human beings can create things, tools, machines that have an independent effect on our identity, how we think, feel, act, perceive. They just didn't get it, and they're trying to catch up. And they're trying to catch up by scaring people into giving the state unilateral, comprehensive power to decide how they will be ruled by machines. The only way to prevent that from happening is for people to create the tools and the resources that ordinary citizens can use to self-govern and to participate together independently and through their own initiative in the creation and establishment of culture and of markets. This is, in some ways, this is a very foreign terrain that we're stumbling into, but in other ways, it's the same as it always has been. Human beings are political creatures. We are alive, we are incarnate, we are ensouled, and if we cannot engage in political life, we cannot be fully human. And if we do not have control over the space-time in which we exist, human space-time, then we are being controlled by entities that belong to a different space-time. And we're already on our way there. You look at, we've had distributed real-time databases for a long time. 5G is coming. That means zero latency. That means, theoretically, all the machines can communicate with all the other machines instantaneously around the world forever. Human space-time is being collapsed. And cyborg space-time is on the rise. I'm not the one who's going to say, throw the wooden shoes into the gears, burn down the data centers. Ted Kaczynski was right. That's not my message. And it's not going to be my message. Because the technology is assuredly not neutral. It does have specific effects that we can understand and that we can trace and that we can warn ourselves about before it's too late. But at the same time, technology Some of it is akin to a weapon. Some of it is akin to plumbing, and some of it is akin to both. You can definitely grab a length of lead pipe and do some real damage with it. So if we're going to make it, we need to understand the nature of these entities that now swarm over our world. We need to understand that their organizational form is the swarm, and we need to understand that a regime that rules and orders through swarm management is one that is incompatible with the American way of life, with a Republican form of government, and with the constitutional order that we supposedly live under today. I mean, I think these are just really quite simple and almost dispassionate facts of the matter. And people are afraid to make these assessments because they don't understand what to do, or they feel like it's too late for them to be properly educated, or they think that, there's something, quote unquote, fake and gay about trying to fight in some way. There are many reasons why fatalism and passivity are sinking so deeply into the souls of so many people. Many reasons why so many people, younger, quote unquote, younger people, when they're polled, say, ultimately, if I had to choose between like a crappy real life and a nice fake life in the multiverse, like sign me up, shoot me into the multiverse, beam me up, Scotty. Mark Andreessen, a very intelligent man who's very perceptive about certain elements of this world that we're entering into, gave an interview a while back where he said, look, reality is overrated. It's been 5,000 plus years of trying to make reality work for most people, and the track record's not so good. And so, it's time to build means it's time to build virtual worlds. On the one hand, it's true that things have sunken to such a level in the real world that the most direct and welcoming place for individuals and groups who want to create institutions that are properly organized for a digital age, that's the virtual world. That's the frontier that you can sort of, ride off into with your bros and build. It's harder to do that in real life than it has been in a long time. At the same time, if you forsake reality, you are forsaking your humanity. And I don't think that things have gotten to that point quite yet where we are obliged to do that. And in fact, I would say that that forsaking reality and forsaking reality and therefore forsaking our humanity is exactly what we are being deviously encouraged to do, even when it appears that it's for a good cause, or it's only so that we can fight fire with fire. Would that it were so simple. It's not that simple. There are so many messages being pumped out of the regime and its allies about various crises, whether it's climate or whiteness or whatever. Many crises. And all of these crises are ultimately portrayed, I mean, of course, the pandemic, as a threat to our lives. And yeah, it's good to be alive, definitely. Warts and all, even with suffering. Suffering is inextricable from life. We have to learn to, we need to return to an understanding of suffering that is compatible with life. But at the same time, even more important than the body count is our humanity. And if you think of the trolley meme, and on one track is like, well, some people might die, and then the other one is, well, we might have our humanity disfigured or distorted out of recognition for the indefinite future. I mean, we need to remember, and we need to be reminded of why it is that preserving our humanity is still yet even more important than preserving our life and limb.
And so that kind of brings us to where going forward, what are practical things that we can do to resist? I know in our lives every day. I wanted to add maybe one reason that people that people don't want to kind of face what's going on is I think it's a bit of a weakness, maybe cowardice as well, because then they have to realize how they have to do something, and it's really tough, and it takes a certain grit and mettle to go against this, as our forefathers have every generation. I see you're publishing your forthcoming book on a website called canonic.nyz, where people will be able to buy it with crypto. And this model seems censorship proof. What are the hopes, dreams, fears for you regarding whether it's Bitcoin or the endless forms of crypto that we have out there, or other technologies? We've got 3D printing, which gives you the possibility, a lot of do-it-yourself kind of stuff. And what are some practical things for you going forward? How do we resist?
Yeah. So, and the idea isn't just to resist. The idea is to get on with the business of living. And the site that you mentioned is actually canonic.xyz, like the last three letters of the alphabet. It was founded by a good friend of mine who was an ex-Googler himself, but he was there young enough and came from Albania, so he already had a sort of pre-modern mindset. So that by the time he was done with his tour of duty, he realized sort of what the stakes were and what the alternatives were. And so an author came to him and said, hey, it would be amazing if authors could just do it themselves and do it in a way that couldn't be deleted or edited or put through layers of gatekeepers. And so Canonic was created so that anyone can self-publish onto the blockchain and put their book up for sale in Bitcoin. It's also possible on Canonic to NFT your book, which I will be doing in a couple weeks. If you are listening to this podcast and have a desire to know in advance exactly what is happening with the book, when it's becoming available, how to access the NFT offerings, and when the book goes on sale, just go on over to humanforever.us, and you can just plop in your email address and you will be in the know. So, why am I doing this? I mean, the book, Human Forever itself, makes the claim that there's this old kind of poem, a very short poem, at the kind of the height of British imperialism, and that poem runs as follows: "Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun, and they have not." And that was kind of how the Victorian gentleman would laugh about the way that British imperialism worked. Either you found yourself in the middle of Africa about to be wiped out by an army of locals, or you found yourself in the same situation with a machine gun. And so there was a recognition that certain technologies can make or break your ability to move about in the world doing what you want. Now, our situation is, of course, much different from the situation of the British Imperials. That was, the Electric Age. That was an age of the worship of the will. It was an age of the worship of light. It was an age of occultism. All of these things that resulted really from people suddenly being immersed in this bath, this surround of electric technology, radio, telegraph, on and on. And it inspired many Europeans to try to take over the world, and to create a kind of technological heaven on earth through electricity. You look back to Cecil Rhodes, whose Rhodes Scholarship is still alive and well. And there's a famous, I forgot if it was a lithograph or an etching or what it was, of Rhodes, the Rhodes Colossus, bestriding the continent of Africa with 1 foot in Cape Town and 1 foot in Cairo. And this is remembered as this, this large adult white man sort of flexing on Africa. And that's part of it, of course. But what is forgotten or excluded is that why was he straddling the continent in this way? And why did he have his arms aloft over his head? And what was in his hands stretching from Cairo to Cape Town? The telegraph. It was electricity. It was all about the medium and the consequences of the medium. And so the situation that we're in today is not an imperialistic one. It is one of defense. It is one of establishing the preservation and protection of our human faculties and our human institutions. It is one where the key frontier is one of inwardness, not of thrusting outward. And so, the jingle or the limerick that I would use today is, whatever happens, we have got a data center and they have not. If you do not have a data center, if you are not computing, then you are being computed. You are in someone else's data center. And the best way that ordinary Americans can participate in the control of data centers, telling the computers what to do. You've got these swarms of these digital entities. They don't care about our fears and hopes and dreams. They're just doing what they do. And what they do is they interoperate. That's what digital entities want. That's what technology wants. Human beings don't want interoperability. They want incommensurability, at least in the West. I am me and you are you, and we each have our souls and we're all human beings. But part of what makes us human is that we are specifically who we are. And so if you want to control the data centers, you want to tell the swarm what to do without turning against our humanity and treating people as if they are not humans. Bitcoin is sitting right there. It's something people can use right now. They can use it not just to kind of stack sats and hold coin, which, if you want to do that, like, nothing's stopping you. But the real power of Bitcoin as a tool and as a defensive weapon and as a way of standing our human vitality back up in a digital age is that it can be used to create communities and to protect communities and to strengthen our shared memory, our personal memory, to restore the connective tissue between people, to encourage and to reward what Alexis de Tocqueville called the reciprocal action of one heart upon another, which he warned. This is back in the mid 1800s, as the electric age was just getting started. He warned that for people like us, if that connective tissue breaks down, then we are basically just going to spiral into self-enclosure and toxic reflexivity. And that's exactly what's happening. So, it's a messy world out there. A lot is in flux. It's a jump ball to remake the world and parts of it in the digital image. And there's really no opting out at this point. If you want to go live in a monastery, go ahead, live in the monastery. But recognize that we can have Bitcoin monasteries too, and everyone can find a role, whether it's having kids or not having kids, family formation or not. There are many paths, and one of the powerful things about Bitcoin is it allows people who pursue many different paths in their own lives to work together as you do in a true culture to build things that aren't going to be built in one day, but are going to last and be durable and provide a foundation and a fortress for our flourishing for centuries to come.
I read an interview recently of the president of Claremont, Ryan Williams, that he gave to The Atlantic, and he says Claremont's mission is to save Western civilization, which is part of what you're doing. Do you have any other or final thought to leave us with?
Humanforever.us. Please, please go check it out. I mean, why am I doing this? Why bother? Back right before COVID, I was thinking pretty seriously about writing a much different book, a book based on sort of more straight ahead political stuff that I'd been doing for a number of years, kind of in the area of governments turning to kind of biosecurity as a way of establishing legitimacy in the wake of the battle in Seattle. There's obviously a whole lot of dismay coming out of the post 9/11 era, where a lot of the leadership class said, oh, it's radical Islamic terrorism that's our great global foe now, and we're just basically going to do another world war, basically. And if we don't do this, they hate us for who they are. It's an existential conflict, and it should define us. But no one really believed, and no one to this day believes that political Islam poses a true existential threat to the West. Maybe in parts of Europe, there's a little bit of greater concern, and okay, but even taking into account all this African migration, I mean, it's still ultimately not a tidal wave of jihadis coming to extend the caliphate deep into Europe. There are issues there, and of course they're there, and I don't mean to discount any of the facts in that area, but the fact remains that Islam is not seen by our ruling factions or by ordinary people as tantamount to what communism was in the Cold War, or even on the level of a competitor as China. But what the establishment did come to believe was a comprehensive threat to their regime was rooted in and based in the far left in the 1990s. And so when you had the battle in Seattle, you had this sort of proto-Antifa, proto-Black Bloc, anarchists decked out head to toe in black, using technology to engage in swarm tactics and to basically humiliate, the New World Order, and to make it seem like it might be impossible to do things like complete the WTO and bring that kind of Davos-led World Economic Forum style infrastructure into being. That was an existential threat. And so that regime figured out that it needed to strike some kind of bargain with the far left. And the bargain that was struck was the one that we see today in the form of wokeness. How do you get people to go from vandalizing a Starbucks and hating international corporations to celebrating corporations, to wanting to sign their lives basically over to corporations? Maybe I'll have a cat or something, but forget having kids, forget like giving back to my community, forget any kind of church life. My corporation is my church. My corporation is my family. How do you execute that swing in the space of 20 years? That's a very compressed period of time. And part of that has to do with the way that technology has reshaped people's perceptions and sensibilities. But a lot of it does have to do with a concerted effort on the part of the regime, which is very nervous, to get those people on board. And in fact, to then use those people to create a new foundation for a new kind of regime, a regime which on the face of it was, oh, we're gay friendly. Oh, we're eco-friendly. Oh, this is all very, very touchy-feely and very warm fuzzy. And that's not where it stopped, and it still hasn't stopped yet. And where it has gone is like, oh, well, the pride flag now needs some extra stripes and things are going to get a little more complicated and the algorithm is changing. And ultimately, when people are using technology to transform physically their sex or their gender, this is no longer about like sexual preference or sexual identity. The sex is just the vehicle, and the destination is transhumanism. The destination is a cyborg social credit system where if you accept the way that the regime remakes you, you are rewarded with a point or a million, as many points as you can gather. And if you refuse, then you get negative infinity social credit points. I mean, this is where we have gotten to, and this is why we have gotten there. But the initial book project before COVID that I was, there was some interest. I had an editor, I had an agent, there were the emails going around, was really focused on, kind of just unpacking that narrative of the, from the battle in Seattle to today. It wasn't primarily focused on technology. who was primarily focused on, you know, the objectives and the political strategies of the expert left elite, as they figured out how to turn the far left, populist left, from enemies to, you know, loyal foot soldiers and worshipers. And, you know, that was interesting enough. And I think that I was, you know, I stand by how far ahead of the curve I was in sort of laying that stuff out. I'd been writing about it on and off since 2008 or so. But by the time COVID really gave me a minute to sort of sit at home and have a good think, the realization came pretty quickly that, you know, if a political theorist, you know, I've got a PhD in political theory, that should mean something still, right? That should be an indicator of, you know, of some level of competence to raise the right issues and to talk about them in a way that is going to be clearly significant and helpful to people. So if a political theorist, if a doctor of political theory doesn't have anything to say about what technology is doing to us and why, then that's, you know, one of many academic disciplines that deserves to die. That's just obsolete. And furthermore, if all I can do is just say stuff, I mean, you can, you know, go on Amazon, go into Barnes and Noble, like every minute of every day, go on Twitter. These young guys, they wake up, they log on, and they're like, no, you must listen to me. No, really, like this time I'll really explain the world. Like, come on, guy. And it's just logorrhea, and it's information overload, and there's no way for people to experience how that content can give them purchase on the context in which they find themselves. And so I felt really compelled, you know, I felt like I had a duty in a couple of different ways, to myself, to my family, to my, you know, to my mentors, my professors, to my country, to my civilization, to God. Like, it's a long list. A duty to write a book about that, and to really kind of, you know, put everything else to one side and to focus very calmly but very frankly on why we are where we are, how we got there, and what we can do about it. And to make clear to people that there is something they can do about it, and then to go that one final step and say, you know, this isn't just another book on the bookshelf. This is a book that's going to be presented to you and is going to be sold and offered in a way that models the message of the book. It's a proof of, you know, not just of work on my end, but it's a proof of concept. So that's why it's on Canonic, and that's why it's on chain. And, you know, this should be exciting. This is an opportunity that everyone can get involved in, if they have the courage to do so.
All right. I can't wait to purchase Human Forever when it comes out. I've signed up at humanforever.us or .us. Your Twitter is at James Poulos. Of course, there's AmericanMind.org and Claremont.org. Everyone subscribe to all of James' channels now. And thanks for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Thanks so much. A real pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast interview. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list through which you can receive an update of every new podcast, as well as a long list of key news headlines once a week. We're being heavily censored. YouTube has deleted some of our videos, and we currently have one strike. Patreon has terminated our account. Facebook has restricted our page, and Reddit has been deleting posts. Our favorite social media channels are Telegram and Twitter. The best places to watch the podcast beyond YouTube are on Odyssey, BitChute, and Brighteon. The best places to listen to the podcast are on SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, Google, or on any other podcast app. To help keep this podcast alive, leave a review on Apple Podcasts and wherever else. Subscribe to all our platforms and leave a donation if possible via Subscribestar, PayPal, Bitcoin, or Ethereum. You can also find us on MeWe, Minds, Gab, Float, VK, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Thanks for listening.